For the last 150 years, every historian, every textbook, every museum placard has told you the same thing. Dice were invented in the Old World, Mesopotamia, Iran, somewhere around 3000 BCE. That's the official story. It's also, as of a few months ago, completely wrong. In 2026, a study published in one of the most respected archaeology journals in the world proved that Native Americans were making dice and gambling with them over 12,000 years ago. That's 6,000 years older than anything found in the so-called birthplace of civilization. Let that sink in, and once you start looking, that discovery isn't an isolated weird find. It's the first data point in a pattern that repeats independently on at least 4 continents for the next 10,000 years. Stoneboards, animal bone dice, rules nobody could read for over a century. A Roman emperor who reportedly had a special gaming table bolted to his carriage so he could play dice while traveling between cities, and whose funeral speech spent more time roasting him for gambling than mourning his death. By the end of this video, you'll understand why people who hadn't invented writing, farming, or the wheel had already figured out how to formalize pure chance into a game, and why almost every single civilization that followed kept doing it, no matter how hard the law, the philosophers, or apparently the carriage designers tried to stop them. This is what actually happened. Here's the assumption most of us walk around with. Gambling is a vice, a modern temptation, something invented somewhere along the way to separate people from their money. Casinos, corner stores, maybe the Romans if you're feeling historical. The archaeological record says the opposite. Humans were formalizing games of pure chance before we had permanent shelter, before we had writing, before most of the civilizations we associate with the ancient world had even started. And here's the thing that should actually surprise you. They didn't do it for money. At least not at first. The reason keeps showing up in the evidence, again and again, across cultures that had no contact with each other and no shared language. And it has almost nothing to do with winning. So the real question isn't, why do humans gamble? The question is, what were 12,000-year-old hunter-gatherers getting out of rolling a piece of bone on the ground? Something valuable enough that they kept doing it across different continents with zero contact between them for the next 10,000 years? Let's start with the discovery that broke the timeline. In a 2026 paper published in American Antiquity, Cambridge University Press, the flagship journal of the Society for American Archaeology, Colorado State University, PhD student Robert Madden identified what he calls binary lots. Small, carefully shaped pieces of bone, flat on one side, modified on the other, designed to land one way or the other when thrown. Heads or tails, basically. Except this is roughly 12,800 years older than coins. The oldest examples come from Folsom period sites in Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, dated to the very end of the last ice age. These weren't farmers. They had no metal tools, no writing, no permanent homes. They were following herds of bison across a continent that was still thawing out from an ice age. And they had already designed and refined a piece of equipment with exactly one function, producing a random outcome on purpose. Madden found evidence at 57 separate sites across a 12-state region, spanning thousands of years of continuous use. And he was blunt about why it took this long to identify. In most cases, these objects had already been excavated and published. What was missing wasn't the evidence. It was a clear, continent-wide standard for recognizing what we were looking at. The proof had been sitting in museum drawers for decades. Nobody had known what they were looking at. Now, here's the part that should change how you think about this. Madden's explanation for why these communities built dice, his core argument, the one that gives this whole video its shape, is that games of chance weren't a distraction from the serious work of survival. They were, in his words, powerful social technologies. Neutral, rule-governed spaces where unrelated groups could meet, exchange goods and information, form alliances, and manage uncertainty, without anyone needing to win or lose anything that actually mattered outside the game. A frozen ice age plain, a piece of shaped bone, and the first recorded attempt to turn uncertainty into something you could share with a stranger. Now jump forward 10,000 years and halfway around the world. A Bronze Age city in what is now southeastern Iran, Shahr-i-Sukhteh, which translates to the Burnt City. Population in its peak was estimated at over 100,000 people. A UNESCO World Heritage Site. And the place where archaeologists found what is, as of now, the oldest confirmed dice in the Old World. 4 bone dice, a 20-square game board, and 27 geometric playing pieces, all dated to roughly 2,800 BCE. You will absolutely see this called the world's oldest backgammon set if you search for it. It is not. There is no real archaeological ancestry connecting this 20-square board to actual backgammon. That's a catchy headline that stuck. What this is, more accurately, is one of the earliest known examples of the same board game family that produces our next stop. And here's the detail the headlines always leave out. The board wasn't found in a palace or a treasury. It was found in a burial. The dice and the pieces were placed in a grave, beside a body, on purpose. The same pattern that keeps showing up every time we find these things. In a city of over 100,000 people, with metalworking, trade routes, and textile production, the thing someone decided to take with them into death was a game board. 2 civilizations, 12,000 miles apart, thousands of years apart, both independently arrived at the same solution. A flat surface with squares, some pieces, and a randomizer made of bone. The shape of the problem, and the shape of the answer, was apparently not that hard to find. Around the same era in the Royal Cemetery at Ur, in what is now southern Iraq, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley dug up 5 nearly identical game boards during excavations in the 1920s. Beautiful objects, inlaid with shell rosettes, lapis lazuli, and red limestone. Clearly important. Clearly games of some kind. 4-sided tetrahedral dice included. For 60 years, nobody had any idea how they were played. The rules of one of the oldest board games on Earth sat completely lost. Until, in the early 1980s, a curator at the British Museum named Irving Finkel translated a cuneiform tablet that had been sitting in the museum's collection since 1880. It had been discovered in Babylon, written by a Babylonian scribe named Iti-Marduk-Balattu, dated to approximately 177 BCE. Itself a copy of an even older text. Buried in the dense bureaucratic Babylonian was a complete set of playing instructions. 7 pieces per player, 4-sided dice. A shared central path where landing on your opponent sent them back to start. The rosette squares were safe spaces. Land there and you couldn't be ejected. Copies of this board have been found across the ancient world: Iran, Syria, Turkey, Cyprus, Sri Lanka. 4 versions were found in Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt alone. 1 game, a dozen civilizations, all independently deciding it was worth having. But here is the detail that elevates this from a museum curiosity to something stranger. When Finkel was doing fieldwork decades later, he met an elderly Iraqi Jewish woman living in Israel named Rachel Levi. She recognized the board immediately. She'd played a version of it as a girl, she told him, using cowrie shells instead of dice. She sat across from him and demonstrated the moves from memory. Her aunts had taught her. Her aunts' aunts had taught them. A 4,600-year-old Mesopotamian game had been quietly surviving inside a family's living memory the entire time Western historians thought it was extinct. The rules were never actually lost. They just weren't being written down anywhere historians thought to look. Egypt had its own version, and theirs went somewhere stranger than anywhere else. Senet, the name means passing, shows up in Egyptian tombs as early as 2620 BCE, played on a board of 30 squares. Movement was decided by throwing flat casting sticks or knuckle bones. Chance again, doing the deciding. For most of its early history, Senet was probably just a game. Scratch boards have been found worn into temple steps, stone pavements, worker village floors. This was not a game reserved for royalty. Everybody played, but somewhere in the New Kingdom, roughly 1550 BCE onward, something shifted. Tomb paintings start showing the dead playing Senet. Not depicting the living playing it. The dead playing it alone, against an invisible opponent. Queen Nefertari, wife of Rameses II, is shown in her tomb in exactly this pose. Seated at a Senate board, mid-game, no opponent visible across from her. By this point, the board's final squares had accumulated genuine religious meaning. Square 27 was called the Waters of Chaos. Land there, and your piece could be sent backward or removed from the board entirely. The last 5 squares mapped onto stages of the soul's journey through the afterlife. The final square was rebirth. The throw of the sticks wasn't really random anymore. Or rather, the Egyptians didn't see it as random. A random outcome in their framework was simply a message from fate they hadn't yet learned to read. Playing Senet was practicing that conversation. Tutankhamun was buried with 4 Senet sets of varying quality. A rough traveling set, a simple wooden one, a gilded ceremonial version on a carved stand. Not because he needed entertainment in the afterlife, because the dice, or the sticks, were a direct line to whatever was waiting on the other side of Square 30. And then there's Rome, where gambling stopped being mysterious or spiritual and became primarily a legal and imperial headache. Dice games, tesserae, were technically illegal in Rome for 11 months out of every year. The one exception, Saturnalia, the December festival where normal social hierarchies dissolved and even slaves could gamble beside their masters. The law banning gambling the rest of the year was called the Lex Aliaria, passed in 204 BCE. Nobody followed it. Not tavern owners who painted signs on their walls advertising good food and gambling within. Not the patrons who left inscriptions on gaming tables that translate, roughly, to get up, you know nothing about the game. Make room for better players. That's not a warning. That's 2,000-year-old trash talk preserved in stone. And not the emperors. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, the man who built the Roman Empire, complained in his own letters about losing money at dice. He lost, he wrote, with the cheerful resignation of someone who had decided losing wasn't the point. Claudius, the emperor who came later, the one history has been slightly unkind to, reportedly wrote an entire book about dice strategy. A full treatise on dice. The book is lost, which is either a tragedy or a mercy depending on your view of Claudius. He also had a gaming table specially fitted to his carriage so he could play dice while traveling between cities. The ancient world's first mobile gaming setup. When the philosopher Seneca wrote a satirical piece about Claudius's soul being condemned in the afterlife, his punishment wasn't fire or torment. Seneca had him eternally trying to play dice from a cup with no bottom. Every throw, the dice fall through. The game never ends. Seneca clearly had opinions about Claudius's priorities. And then there are the cheaters. Archaeologists have pulled loaded dice from Pompeii, weighted to favor certain numbers. But the find that still gets researchers excited came in the year 2000, when a 10-year-old Belgian schoolgirl on a class trip to a Roman site accidentally dropped and broke a bone die. A strange grayish liquid leaked out. Mercury. Decades later, Belgian archaeologists confirmed it. Some Roman dice found across Gaul and Germania had been filled with liquid mercury to control how they landed. Cheating technology, 20 centuries before Las Vegas had a reason to invent it. One game, 11 months of illegal, 4 emperors with documented gambling habits, and dice filled with mercury to tilt the odds. Nobody followed the law. That's the point. They couldn't. Here's what sits underneath all 5 of these. 12,000 years, 4 continents, 0 contact between most of them. And every single time, the same instinct. Take an outcome that should be completely meaningless. A bone landing one side up instead of the other. And build an entire structure around it. Ritual, status, law, religion, imperial decrees, satirical afterlife punishments. Why? In 2004, a neuroscience team at Vanderbilt University, led by researcher David Zald, used brain imaging to answer this question with more precision than any historian could. They found that dopamine, the brain's primary chemical of motivation and reward, doesn't spike hardest when you win something. It spikes hardest when you don't know yet if you're going to win. Uncertainty itself is the trigger. The reward system isn't built to respond to outcomes. It's built to respond to the gap before the outcome. In 2009, a study published in the journal Neuron went further. Researcher Luke Clark and colleagues showed that near misses, losing in a way that looks almost like winning, activate the brain's reward circuitry almost identically to actual wins. The miss feels like progress, like you almost had it, so you keep going. That's not a bug in your brain. That's not a flaw that gambling exploits. That is the same neurological circuitry a Folsom-era hunter-gatherer was running 12,000 years ago, holding a shaped piece of bone, waiting to see which way it landed. You feel it every time you wait for a text reply that hasn't arrived yet. Every time you pull down on a feed to refresh it. Every time a notification number appears and you don't yet know what it says. The half second between the throw and the landing. That is the oldest reward system the human brain has. We didn't invent the thrill of not knowing. We just got increasingly sophisticated about building things to deliver it. 12,800 years ago, on a frozen plain in what is now Wyoming, someone held a small piece of shaped bone, threw it down, and watched to see which side landed up. They had no writing to record what happened. No farms, no metal tools, no idea that 12,000 years from that moment, someone would still be doing the exact same thing. On a phone, in a casino, at a kitchen table with a deck of cards, and feeling the exact same thing they felt. That gap. That half second of not knowing. Turns out that's not a modern weakness or an ancient superstition. It's the oldest game the human brain knows how to play, and 12,000 years of evidence suggests we have absolutely no intention of stopping.